So let me introduce today's keynote speaker. Yesterday we had a video keynote, but today we have our keynote speaker all the way from Denmark. She has published lots of very interesting articles. I've read several about librarians as activists, the post-neutrality of librarianship and sustainability in libraries. She finished her postdoc at Copenhagen University in December, and she's now working as an assistant professor at the University of Southern Denmark. And her name is Mia Mathiasson. Mia's research interests cover the societal role of public libraries. You're very welcome to take your place, especially concerning libraries and librarians as activists, social entrepreneurs, and partners in sustainable development processes. And we felt that her research was just spot on for the theme for this year. And Mia is giving her keynote entitled Sustainability in Practice, the Proactive Role of Librarians in Sustainable Librarianship. And we can't wait. Did I sort of raise the bar here now? All right, warm welcome.
Okay, do I go? Is the sound okay? Can you hear me? Is it too loud? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen-Marie. Thank you for inviting me to EAHIL. I'm very, very proud or honored to be here. I'm a very young scholar, maybe not in age, but in profession time. And this is also my first keynote. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. I guess I made that clear when I entered the stage beforehand. Okay. Yeah, as Karen-Marie said, my name is Mia Mathiasson. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Southern Denmark, where I also teach at the BA level in library science. Yes, as I said, I'm honored and very happy to be here in Trondheim, but also I feel a little bit nervous, not only because this is my first keynote, but also because I'm here in front of you after yesterday's very excellent talk by David Lankes, who is, of course, also for me a big inspiration. So I'm a bit starstruck and also a little bit nervous to fill in this space now. But I'll do my best. In his keynote yesterday, David Lankes shared with us insights about the unsettling situation in the US, especially the insecurity, fear, and mistrust that hovers over American librarianship. As he said, this is not a dystopic future. This is actually scenarios happening right now for colleagues across the sea, but also it could be a dystopic foresight for us, for the profession, also elsewhere. On this very serious note, and with no intention to underestimate the brutalities of this current situation, today I will take a more optimistic perspective on the future of librarianship. I do that because I believe that we actually can be part of changing this negative narrative, but also because and also as a profession or as a researcher, this is also part of my job, to speak up and to engage in this conversation on how to change the narrative. So perhaps you already guessed that this was a positive talk by the balloons, and this is where we're going to be. On a little disclaimer about this very optimistic approach, of course, there is a situation here. Context is very important. I speak from a very safe place. I speak from a Danish librarian field where I sort of involve in what goes on and what I look at. And this, of course, is a context, so you bear in mind that I speak from this safe place. Also, as I said, I see my role as a researcher in this field as part of engaging in this conversation about how to act, how to proact, and how to engage in the topics that actually needs our attention in the very pressing situation that we have. And to do that, to act, we need to have some guidelines and some visions that can lead us. And therefore, today, I will reflect on you, with you, on this very sort of abstract idea of sustainable librarianship to provide some kind of a guideline or perhaps new visions about how to proceed, how to take on from here. Yes, but first, I want to say a little bit more about myself so you know from where I speak. I'm originally educated in art history, so this is my background. However, I've changed track. Over the last 6 years, I've been researching in public libraries, especially the social and societal role of these institutions and the work of librarians in particular. I did my PhD, as you see here, on the history of public library programming and the ideas and practices that shaped this kind of this part of librarianship. Also, as you see here, a picture of me defending the thesis in my kitchen on Zoom during the lockdown in March 2021. That was not what I expected. So yes, I took a turn. I'm in the library business today because I seriously believe that librarians have, or in the transformative potential of these institutions. I believe that libraries can change lives, and I believe that librarians can change lives. And this transformative potential, for me, is the essence of librarianship. And this is where I base my talk or my work. So for the last 2.5 years, I've been researching particularly how and why librarians engage in the sustainability agenda. I've been a part of a research project, actually a Norwegian-funded research project called Upscale. It's based in Cicero, the climate research center in Oslo, and it's looking into how libraries, or public libraries in particular, can have the potential to sort of upscale sustainable collaborative consumption. As part of this project, I've done research on and case studies on concluded experiments and emergent practices of librarians working with focusing on sustainability. In this work, I've been especially interested in the transformative potential of libraries and the proactive role of librarians as change agents, activists, and social entrepreneurs working for a societal transformation. We can term this work sustainable librarianship, and we're not the only ones doing that, of course. This is a part of a bigger conversation, yet this is what I refer to when I say sustainable librarianship. Building on my research and the research of many colleagues in this talk, I want you to consider I wish to focus on this idea and also to sort of make it a little bit more visible what we mean when we talk about sustainable librarianship and the practices that follows. But before we do that, I want you to do something for me. I want you to consider for a moment what the idea of a sustainable library actually entails. I want you to close your eyes now and think for a moment, what does a sustainable library look like to you? Yes, thank you. This is what a sustainable library look like if you ask the AI image generator of Bing. Organically shaped buildings full of vegetation, big windows and bookshelves instead of walls, just to give us a mark that this is actually a library. We can see more pictures here. I do not know if these AI-generated images reflects or somehow resembles what you have imagined. Perhaps by looking at these images, you can extend on or build your own visions about what a sustainable library entails. However, whatever input these pictures might give us as inspiration and reflection, they do not give us any clue as what takes place within the libraries. They do not tell us anything about how sustainable librarianship is practiced and what these practices look like. So in this talk, I ask, what does sustainable librarianship look like? And how is sustainable librarianship practiced? What are the possible impacts of these practices to the future of librarianship? And bear in mind that this will not be questions that I provide a final answer to, of course. These questions will guide the talk and the reflections we will have. And also, I wish to say that in the end, hopefully we'll have like 10 minutes to questions. So if anything comes up, please note it, and please tell me afterwards, or we can have a conversation about it. Also comments, of course. Very much welcome. Okay, but to engage in this agenda, it's very important. We need to have some kind of context. As I said, context is very important. And I know you like research, and you want me to also be clear about these, the background from where I speak. And this is actually something I would like to do now. So to approach the first question, what does sustainable librarianship look like? We might need to take a step back by setting the scene of this idea. The context of sustainable librarianship is what we could term the sustainability agenda, which has been increasingly consistent in public and political discourse during the last 10 years. Of course, longer, but let's focus on this. Within the last 10 years, and also within the library field, we talked increasingly about sustainability, and yet sometimes it's still very hard to grasp what these ideas are about. Sustainability is a concept often seen in the context of the massive environmental disruption of our current day and age. However, sustainability is more than climate change. Sustainability is about improving living conditions for present and future generations, both economically, socially, culturally, as well as environmentally. A central argument in all the research and writing about sustainability and sustainable development is that to secure the well-being of future generations, we need to respond to global challenges by taking action. The status quo is not good enough. We heard that yesterday. We actually need to do something. But what and how? How do we proceed? How do we practice sustainability? As stated by sustainability researcher Leslie Feely, who wrote several books about sustainability, reflecting on this concept, I can really recommend to read them. Sustainability is not a recipe for creating a planetary museum where nothing ever changes. Its goal is not to achieve a culture of permanence. Rather, to practice sustainability is to manage change so that civilization does not undermine the conditions that allow it to flourish within a supportive web of life. Sustainability entails preserving crucial capacities and resources by way of adaptive change. And we'll remember these things, especially the concept of adaptive change, and practicing sustainability to manage change. Thiele also stresses that practices, relationships, and institutions have to initiate and respond to change if they are to endure for long. Thus, when we look at the libraries, a certain level of proactivity and agility is needed. So, to practice sustainability is to manage change. And I know all of you also know that the change is what we call a library constant. So we do that all the time, right? It shouldn't be that hard. But it is. And let's keep in mind this image of the hot air balloon, as I also showed in the beginning, because this is actually not a bad metaphor for thinking about how to practice sustainable librarianship. Moreover, the image of the flying hot air balloon associates well with a central characteristic of sustainability, and that is travel. In her in her introduction to the book Libraries and Sustainability: Programs and Practices for Community Impact, one of the editors, Rebecca Aldrich, argues that sustainability should be understood as a journey rather than the destination. Sustainability as a way of doing and thinking. And here we look at Aldrich's book Sustainable Thinking, which is from 2018. Yes, sustainable librarianship is about taking on this journey. But how to navigate the balloon? Which coordinates do we follow? Leslie Feely describes sustainability as an adaptive art that skillfully grounds the moral commitments in and adapts its practices to the best available science. I guess you have all heard about sustainability as a practice of satisfying current need without sacrificing future well-being. It's about preserving core values and relationships while managing the scale and speed of change. And to do this, Thiele argues that we need to maintain the crucial relationships and values while embracing adaptive change, which requires integrating and sustaining in a holistic way ecological health, economic welfare, social empowerment, and cultural creativity. And the creativity is actually important, and it's one of my main points in this talk. So also keep that in mind. Kirsten Loke and Jennifer Rowley, two researchers within the cultural institutions, especially doing work on GLAM institutions, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, have made similar descriptions of the four components of sustainability, arguing for acknowledging the importance of the cultural aspect of sustainability in institutions and practices. Of course, this is also very important for libraries. So, based on a holistic understanding, now we know what holistic understanding means. In 2015, the United Nations introduced the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm sure you all know them. The SDGs address environmental, economic, social, and cultural aspects of some of the world's most pressing problems, such as poverty, hunger, inequality, and climate change. With the promise to leave no one behind, the SDGs are sometimes compared to the new human rights, just with baselines. They are also referred to as a common language. Through their specific targets and indicators, each of the 17 SDGs provide us a set of shared coordinates for navigating into the unknown future. In their clear statements such as no poverty, zero hunger, and climate action, as well as better education, SDGs manifest collective visions and shared dreams for a better future, for a better world. So, this is the background for where we speak. Now let's dig into the sustainability agenda within the library fields. I won't go through every detail here, but I will argue, based on research, that within the library field there has been a growing awareness of sustainability and sustainable development, and increasingly so since 2013. From the International Federation of Library Associations, IFLA, to local libraries worldwide. The sustainability agenda within the library field represents a turn in how libraries of all types engage with sustainability and a broader acknowledgement of the sustainability initiatives, from an emphasis on greening library programs and buildings and practices, emphasized in the beginning of this development with the Green Library movement in North America especially, to an integration of the four dimensions we mentioned earlier of sustainable development. That this is a collective effort was made clear in 2021 in the IFLA conference theme, Let's Work Together for the Future. So, now let's take a closer look at sustainable librarianship. Now we know from where we speak. So what does sustainable librarianship look like? And I apologize for all the look-likes. I'm apparently a very visual person, and I sort of realized that when I also say that I have a background in art history. Perhaps it's not that strange. I think we can do a lot of things if we visualize things and argue about them, or sort of on a level where we see the same thing, where we know what we're talking about, where we're on the same page. Sometimes words are very confusing. Sometimes things get lost in translation. But images has some kind of, another vibe to it that we can engage in across of contexts. So yes, what does sustainable librarianship look like? I will approach this question from a study of what has been done, or rather what has been written about it, since I did a literature review on these questions. In 2021 to 22, my colleague Henrik Jokumsen and I conducted an extensive literature review of the research publications on libraries' sustainability and sustainable development. In the research review, which was a holistic review, we gathered 102 research publications on these topics. We wanted to know what characterizes the research on library sustainability and sustainable development across of countries, across of periodical differences, a lot of things. We want to map the field. We want to get a better understanding. We also wanted to understand how sustainability and sustainable development concepts were used, which understandings of sustainability dominated, referring to the 4 different understandings of sustainability, or the aspects of sustainability. And we also wanted to know why sustainability or sustainable development was argued for in these publications, what were the main rationales behind it, and which implication does these rationale have on the future librarianship. So looking at this mapping, we found, not unlike the timeline just presented, a development here in research publications from the beginning of the late 1990s, with relatively few publications. Sustainability was not a concept within the library field literature at this time. We had a lot of literature on green libraries, but this literature has this very environmental focus, so we excluded that part. There's really good studies on that. You can tell, I have references later on, but focusing on sustainability or sustainable development, we see an increase around 2010 and sort of peak in 2013. We also see that this goes down again, and then we have a re-emergent phase in 2019. So having in mind the timeline we talked about earlier, this is actually very representative of the conversations within the field. And of course the public engagement in this topic and political. So we also wanted to categorize these publications according to their understandings and use of sustainability concepts. Thus we categorized them according to if they had a specific focus or a dominating concept that dominating understanding that took over the argumentation. And we found that 45 of them had this environmental or ecological focus, 9 a dominating economic focus, 9 a dominating social focus, 3 addressing the cultural aspects of sustainability, and actually 36 having a holistic approach. And looking at how this correlates with the periodical distribution of the core concept uses, we found, of course, that the environmental approach, ecological approach, is particularly dominating in the takeoff phase, the green over here, whereas the holistic approach gets more and more present and is more dominating in the re-emergent phase. Not more dominating than the environmental, but you get the picture. And I'm not good at numbers, so please bear with me that this is perhaps not the most the best way to illustrate this. Yes, we can go back to that. We also, based on an analysis of the content of these publications, came down, narrowed it down to 4 main rationales that went across these publications and across the different understandings of sustainability. What we found out here was the 4 main rationales and their possible implications. And the main rationales are optimization, legitimation, demonstration, and transformation. The legitimation rationale, we found that across of all the different understandings of sustainability, specifically in relation to library advocacy, image, and marketing, of course. It was particularly dominating in literature on environmental and economic understandings of sustainability. However, the legitimation rationale is also identified in publication classified as social, cultural, and holistic. From a cultural perspective, Loke and Rowley, that I talked about earlier, they argue that libraries and other GLAM institutions face multi-layered and often conflicting sustainability requirements. This means that these requirements impose on the institutions to preserve cultural heritage, ensure the effective management of the internal culture of their organizations, and also demonstrate commitment to external cultural sustainability goals. This is a lot to take in. And this quote sums up very well, we argue, the cross-pressure that these institutions face in the terms of legitimation. There's a pressure between the external and the internal motivation for working with sustainability and sustainable development. And the implications this evokes on librarians in the legitimation rationale is to navigate this cross-pressure, to fly the hot air balloon, you could say. It's about being very explicit about one's external and internal interests and how to take action on these. The optimization rationale is particularly prevalent in publications on the environmental and economic understanding of sustainability. For instance, we find within the environmental perspective a lot of publications on how to optimizing buildings, for example, designing new and environmentally friendly libraries, or transforming existing libraries into new and more to fit green standards. The optimization rationale implies that librarians and libraries, of course, minimize the use of resources and optimize resources already at hand. This goes for both material resources, such as electricity, paper, and plastic bags, but also immaterial resources, such as practices and workflows. And it also covers, for instance, coming up with optimizing digital services or creating new solutions for doing more with less. The optimization rationale thus implies that libraries and librarians must be resourceful by optimizing their operations and exploiting the existing resources. Yes, the demonstration rationale perhaps is very sort of self-explanatory. It's very, very particularly articulated in the environmental literature, where libraries are described as demonstration vehicles, educational tools, and living laboratories for teaching sustainability and for promoting and making available green or environmental information literacy. Moreover, by offering collections, services, and programs where sustainability initiatives are demonstrated and made available, librarians can engage their community members in these activities and actually create this everyday action mentioned earlier. So, as argued for by library researcher Petra Hauge, libraries and librarians should take over the responsibility to teach green literacy in response to dramatic climate change and growing ecological awarenesses, and use their positive image to set a precedent through their various service strategies. As such, the demonstration rationale bears implication for both libraries and librarians to be good examples and role models for their communities. The transformation rationale is sort of dominating, or how to say, very dominating in the understanding of libraries as this social institution. By offering equal access to both information and places, providing possibilities for individual and community development, libraries have, in this social understanding, a transformative role and potentiality. Thus, from a social perspective, the potentiality for transformation is central rationale behind, for instance, community development or community resilience. And this is partly facilitated by the access to information, but also the access to the physical library buildings. In the literature classified as holistic, we find libraries described as vital assets and key players in the sustainability agenda. Moreover, we find librarians described as active change agents, as change drivers. We find librarians described as these social entrepreneurs that cannot sit back and wait for change to happen, but need to do something, need to stand up. The proactive role of librarians is characterized by the transformation rationale and its possible implications. Like the demonstration rationale, transformation is about libraries and librarians serving as good examples and role models. However, inspiring others to follow their examples, yes. But however, being good and inspirational is not enough in this implication. The rationale of transformation implies that libraries and librarians should be proactive change agents, which entails taking action and activating their communities as well. And in the spirit of visualization, we made this model to sum up the findings, to provide an overview. In the literature review, we refer to this model as a call for action. Perhaps that's a little overstated, but it is a call for conversation. It is a conversation starter. It is a way to create this image of what we actually speak about when we speak about sustainable librarianship, and to have a common ground for further reflections on this. So now we approach a conceptualization and a visualization of sustainable librarianship through an overview of the research publications. However, although the model provides a visualization, it's still very abstract in terms of how to practice sustainable librarianship, even if we put all the new icons on that I made for today. Therefore, I will look at the time here. We have half an hour, that's good. Therefore, let's take a closer look at how sustainable librarianship is practiced. We'll do that through an insight into a case study that I'm currently working on, so bear with me that this is a work in progress. It's a case study of Ballerup Public Libraries and the Danish library inter-organizational network called DB 2030. The Ballerup Public Libraries is in the Danish library field sort of known as the frontrunners of the sustainability agenda. They are also very sort of motivated in making this a shared library agenda and in engaging in advocacy, political discourses, etc. on these topics. In the case study, we focus on the emergent practices of the librarians working proactively as change agents, insight activists, and social entrepreneurs at the Ballerup Public Libraries by arranging festivals and events and forming networks and partnerships around the sustainability agenda. Moreover, we also focus on, as I said, the DB 2030 network, which is this inter-organizational network established in 2019 by a small group of librarians who had enough. These librarians were from different libraries. One of them was from Ballerup Public Libraries. So they actually been part of sort of the establishment of this network. They had it. They wanted to do something, they wanted to change something, and they said on a meeting, we need to collaborate. But we don't need this only to be a library agenda. The sustainability agenda is a shared agenda. We need an inter-organizational network. We need partners from all over, different sectors, different perspectives, to work together on this. One of the aims of the network is to strengthen the public support of the sustainability action, the everyday actions that we mentioned earlier. And to focus on how libraries as a hub for engaging communities, engaging civic participation, can be this central hub for the SDGs and the sustainability agenda broader. So it was established in 2019, as I said, and today the DB 2030 network, it's called DB 2030 because it refers to the Danish Biblioteksforening, Danmarks Biblioteksforening, DB 2030 because of the 2030 agenda. And now it's actually located or associated with the Danish Association of Libraries, which also partake the function of secretary. And today the network counts 36 members, of which only 20 are representing the library field, either as libraries members or as library organizations. So we also have very many different other fields represented. For instance, we have a climate think tanks. We have organization working with participation and volunteering. Delta Denmark, for instance. We have focus on climate challenges and green neighborships. We have the youth school, and we have universities, etc. Very short about the DB 2030 network. The work of the network is engaged or is concentrating around some work groups. And 3 of the work groups that we focus on here in the study are a certification program work group that looks at how to create these certification for the SDGs for libraries. And that's already been implied, and Ballerup Public Libraries were one of the first 10 Danish libraries to be certified SDG library. What this entails, of course, is a very interesting discussion, and we will not have that here. But look at the website if you're interested in finding out more about this. They also focus on a work group on competence development. This is not only for librarians, it's also for municipality workers, other interested in sort of qualifying how to work with the SDGs. And thirdly, they have this focus on how to, again, engage broader, how to sort of inspire civic engagement in the work in the work of the SDGs by arranging festivals and events, creating cities engagement and showcasing the SDGs and the work of the network and its member organizations. And this work group is based partly on the experiences of Ballerup Public Libraries. So this is one of the things that they actually contributed with to the network and also now take sort of ownership of in relation to the network. Yes, so as I said, Ballerup Public Libraries have been a very significant part of establishing the DB 2030 network and also in running it now. And through this work, we argued that they are creating and sustaining new sustainable practices within librarianship. For instance, the network has had a tangible impact on the political agenda in Denmark. In 2021, the governmental action plan for the SDGs, the Danish public libraries is actually mentioned as local anchors or hubs for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2022-23, more of the network's tasks, such as competence development programs, development of new types of programs and debates, and the extension of the certification program to encompass even more libraries, has also been embedded in the Financial Act. So this is a real impact. This is not just librarians standing on a soap case and sort of yell to do something. They actually do it. I think it's inspirational. But again, the context, this is a safe environment. It's not very sort of, it is proactive, but it's not very problematic to raise the hand for sustainability agenda in Denmark. It's not something that's seen as controversial, and it's not something that the librarians risk their profession or their personal identity to do. So this is also important. However, we look at the practices of how this is actually done. In the interview with the librarians, they describe their work as focused on development, implementation, innovation, decoration, and the Sustainable Development Goals. The development in sort of the work task around development entails developing the new library strategy. It's every third year. This work, of course, is very important to set the tone. Here, we also see how the SDGs is actually involved in this work. For instance, Ballerup Public Library refer to themselves as pathfinders and creators of cohesion, or sammenhængskraft in Danish. We'll get back to this later. But this is part of sort of creating this overview of sort of the vision to follow, but only for a 3-year period. However, the implementation entails that they actually do this, that they actually take the strategy seriously, and also working with it, looking ahead. They try to implement by thinking, more long term. They try to think how to create sort of this utopic vision, and they actually refer to their work with both the development and implementation of the strategy as working with utopias. They want to create more long-term visions to follow, so that the work is not, in that sense, unsustainable, that it's only the 3-year period. The implementation, for instance, is done by making these goals, everyday goals, which is also part of their the strategy. The innovation entails looking across the organization and the ways they collaborate, looking for new trends and methods. And again, this work is very visionary and very sort of keeping an open mind, being inspired by what is actually out there, and also sort of acknowledging what is taking place around them in their local environment. The decoration might sound like, is that really an interesting... Is that an interesting task? I had that feeling myself, but it's actually very important. Decoration is mentioned here to strengthen the library strategy, to creating rooms that actually support what these visions are, what they want to do, and to support, for instance, citizen engagement and co-creation, to be this community hub that they want to be. So in this sense, decoration and the development and implementation of the strategy is actually very inseparable part of library work. But what is perhaps most interesting here in this thing is the sort of the how to say announcement of working with the SDGs as part of their main tasks. And I already mentioned that the SDGs are actually mentioned in all of the other tasks. So how are they actually working with the SDG? What do they mean? They describe the work with the SDGs as consisting of 3 elements: providing access to information and knowledge about the SDGs, and disseminating this access. And these are, as you know, very basic task of librarianship. This is what we do. This is what librarians have always done, and this is, I argue, what librarians have always done as change agents. Giving access to information and knowledge and disseminating, making this access available, finding who is actually the right person for the right book, that's actually part of the idea of changing the world for individuals, but also collectives. So this is, the change agent in this view is not something new that we add on. However, what is perhaps new about these practices is the third step, that they actually want to solve the problems themselves. And they say that in the strategy, for instance, we cannot just, make this available and inspire to take action. We need to do it. We need to actually solve it. And we also believe that we can solve it. We believe that libraries and librarians have a part of this, a part to take in this work. What is also interesting here is how libraries are stressed as part of the solution. And we can go back to the DP 2030 network and reflect on how they actually now sort of manage to sustain these new practices within a political framework and sustain the role of libraries also in the Financial Act and the governmental action plans and so on. We see this in Denmark, but we also see this elsewhere. So this is not sort of a unique example. However, it is, I hope, inspiring to see how libraries actually work with these things. Yes. Also, as I mentioned, in the library strategy, the librarians describe their role as pathfinders and creators of cohesion. And when I ask about the role of the pathfinder, the green fellow here, one of the informants explains that the term has actually been heavily discussed and that it was actually, it was a big discussion when they created the strategy, but they insisted on keeping it because they think it captures the role of the library profession. The description of the librarian as a pathfinder is interesting then in this work because it's an important role and it's an important part of the librarian's self-image as at the Ballerup Public Library. I asked about what this entails then, and he explained to me that a pathfinder is a librarian that helps patrons search for information, that scouts and find new paths and possibilities, and this includes also being open to new partnerships and networks around. But also it entails taking the first step and going into unknown land. And this is important to stress. This is it without knowing if people will follow. This is taking the role of perhaps ending up somewhere alone, looking stupid. Like today, when I stand here, I risk looking stupid. When you go into the unknown, you don't know if people want to follow you. But you believe that your visions collectively are strong enough that they would. And in this sort of, especially the last part here, about scouting, but also about taking this first step and risking looking stupid. That's what you risk in Denmark, not getting a fine or prison, but looking stupid. That's also very bad. The librarian concludes that in the pathfinder resides the activist. So, to reflect a little bit on this work, we see how the work with sustainability agenda, the SDGs, also within the DB 2030 network, actually is considered circular processes as what is initiated externally. For instance, let's make this network, or let's have this sort of a certificate for libraries, ends up becoming part of the library work. And also vice versa, things they did beforehand, for instance, arranging the festivals and events, end up becoming part of the external or the inter-organizational work. So in this way, we have this circular, very interesting, I think, turn of practices. But we also see how this work is described as creating ripple effects. So, for instance, when the librarian describes his work as reaching out, for instance, you do this is very exciting, can we, or I know that the other person over here has actually done some of the same. He's engaging in what he calls the matchmaking role, but this is not for the library to take on. This is about hooking people up, creating partnerships, and then stepping back and be open to new partnerships. And these ripple effects actually create lots of partnerships, lots of innovation, and lots of engagement in the local community, but also in the national context here. Time is running. So, very short. To inspire, or sort of to make a path for themselves, the librarians have also made this list of dogmas that they try to follow, and that they perhaps, I thought they could be a use to others, as inspiration, of course. We must learn more. We must focus on equality and inequality when we work with segments. We must sort our trash, even more than we do now. We must be visible role models. We must walk the talk. The SDGs must be visible, for instance, in exhibitions. We must strengthen the participatory culture by facilitating conversations and debates and creating the courage to act. We must buy sustainably with a focus on the local possibilities and recycle where we can. We must have a bigger focus on the circular DNA of the library. And we must look to the side and work interdisciplinary in the municipality and with others. And if you look at how these sort of dogmas relate to the model presented earlier, I think we find some interesting correlations or alignments. I also find it interesting that the librarians talk about the very small things, like being better to sort their trash, but they also talk about more radical acts of change. For instance, looking to the side, being open to new engagements, being open to partnerships that doesn't necessarily have to be at the library, owned by the library, but that can exist and live on outside of the library. Also about creating the courage to act, that's very sort of proactive. Of course, also the very important part of being open to blind angles in this work. It's about self-reflectivity. Self-reflectivity. Yes, self-reflectivity. That's a good word. Remember that word because it's actually very important to flying this air balloon, I think. So how do we proceed from here? We need to have time for questions, but I also want to sort of reflect a little bit more on how to take on the journey of sustainable librarianship. So now we looked at the case of Ballerup and the DB 2030 network, and I hope that you can follow me when I say that this was a way to visualize a little bit, being a little bit more specific about how you actually work with sustainable librarianship. However, this is of course one example. It's a case. It's contextual. It's in Denmark. It doesn't happen everywhere, and it's not possible everywhere. So how do we proceed from here? In the case of Ballerup and the DB 2030 network, the SDGs have been this collective vision. Although there are different attitudes to and understandings of the SDGs, they are literally shared goals. As collective agreed, although somewhat universalist, one might say, the shared goals of the SDGs are the destination. They're the end point, but in a utopian sense of the word. The end point will not be as we imagine. yet we need this vision, we need this destination to actually embark on the journey and move ahead. So a very interesting question could be, do we need the SDGs to practice sustainable librarianship? I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I would say no. The answer would be no for me. But we need collective visions, we need dreams, and we need shared goals that provide us with a set of coordinates and guidelines to navigate into the future. And to do that, we, in this case study, build on the work and practices of the public libraries of Ballerup, and analyzing these emerging practices with the use of the concept of utopia as a methodology. It's a very interesting book by Eskelinen and colleagues, but yes, taking a little bit of this, utopia can be used as this critical counter-image to the status quo. We can use it actually to get new ideas, new visions, and the very important thing about working with the utopia is that it's not an individual image of the world. It's not like when you closed your eyes and said, what is a sustainable library to me? This is about engaging in a conversation, making collective visions, and making these visions something that you can embark on together. This, I argue, requires maybe a radical reimagination and focusing on a focus on the journey and not the destination. And this is also something that in practice can be hard because you want baselines, you want to measure how you do it, etc. But let's stay in this proactive reimagination field. Because fantasies require care, they require cultivation, they require discipline. Fantasies are not, as so often imagined, the product of spontaneous invention. They require care, cultivation, and discipline to truly disrupt the system of containment. Such argue Springer and Turpin in their very, very interesting book on library imaginations, also listed later. Anna Sophie Springer also wrote a very interesting essay in this book, and in this essay she elaborates on the library as the perfect place for the imaginary. With a reference to Foucault's Fantasia of the library, Springer argues that the imaginary is a phenomenon of the library as it grows amongst signs in the interval between books. Working with this requires an open mind. It requires cultivating of creativity, of fantasy, and it requires positivity. So a reason to stay positive, and this is one of the last things. I have included this quote. I translated it from Danish, so bear with me, of the Danish musician and writer, intellectual Christian Leth. And this is a quote from an article he wrote recently in Zetland, a Danish newspaper, online newspaper. But it's also part of a bigger conversation in a book he wrote, or sort of launched this year, called "The Future is There Tomorrow." So this is a part of a conversation about making people believe in the future, believe in utopia, believe that they can actually create visions and change something. As he says, if I'm being completely honest, I do not think that we, you and I, should be driven by fear. It is much better to dream about the future than to fear it. Dreams are a more powerful fuel than fear when it comes to making decisions. All great changes in the world, all difficult problems that have ever been solved have been based on a dream that the world could be different from today. So on this happy note, I want you to think about flying the hot air balloon, working with sustainable librarianship as working with utopia, being open, being reflective, and sharing your visions with your colleagues. These practices require a certain level of self-reflectivity, as I said, critical thinking, and being aware of one's blind spots. But they also require that we dare engaging in sometimes utopic visions for a better collective future. So now, to end this, I would like you to think about what you and your peers would like to change at your library. What are your collective visions? What will you do and what can you do? What is the next step you will take? Sustainability as a journey and sustainable librarianship is about taking on this journey. It is about imagination, courage, reflexivity, and conscious decisions. It is about taking the first step and not being afraid of going into the unknown. It is not about winning or being the first one getting there. It is about going there. I hope that you will find this talk inspiring and feel motivated to move forward on the journey of sustainable librarianship and to create the change you want to see for your communities. Thank you.